Welcome to the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and today we're going to look at the quarterback and wide receiver stacks based on my rankings. Now, first of all, went over 250 subscribers, so thank you very, very much from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate it. Please keep liking if you like the video. I'm not going to force your hand on any of these things. If you've watched several videos, if you plan on watching more, subscribe, and always, just comment. I don't care what you say. Really don't. Just, drop a comment. That always helps. All of it helps. It's so, so much appreciated. So thank you very, very much. 250 is awesome. Let's rock our way on up to 500 here in the next month. That would be sweet. And then we'll keep going from there. Now, in today's video, if you watched Monday's video, things are going to be similar to that video, but also much different. Every Monday, I do a mock draft Monday video. This last Monday's video was atypical. I did not focus on the drafting so much as actually talking some strategy. I wanted to then also talk about that strategy for redraft purposes. That strategy is the art of stacking, most specifically quarterback and wide receiver stacks. In today's video, there will be some differences. I will be using my rankings instead of ADP for some of the analysis from the numbers, some of the conclusions from the data, as well as there's a new tool that I came up with from this information that I actually went back and you can find in my article on the website. Let me show that real quick. All right, so I know this is a little bit blown up on the screen here. It doesn't quite show the whole page, but that's all right. I have it large for a reason. So up on the website, I wrote a rather lengthy article here, just talking about, I got my cat right here. She's in her little e-cone, had an emergency situation on Friday, actually, while I was recording that video that came out on Monday, talking about the stacks for best ball purposes, and had to bring her to the vet, had surgery. She's on her road to recovery, so all is good in Snickers' world. She's much happier now. She had been feeling a little under the weather for a couple of days before that happened, and it makes sense why. So if you hear any bumps or anything, that's her moving around. She's got her cone about this far away from the mic right now. You can see my thumb in the image, and it's actually touching the cone. So in this article, at the bottom, do you have the new piece of information that I got from this data, which is the wide receiver and quarterback stack scores. So how strong is that wide receiver quarterback stack when we kind of equalize the quarterback and the wide receiver together? When I did that video on Monday, actually really when I made this little set of information, this tool, I realized that I had been over counting the influence of the wide receiver on the quarterback wide receiver stack. For instance, I really dogged any stack with Patrick Mahomes and one of his wide receivers, and especially according to ADP, that's the 11th best stack and I'll get into how I equalized the quarterbacks along with the wide receivers. Not a perfect system, but when you think about the fact that you do have Patrick Mahomes throwing to the guy, it's the stack number 11. I wouldn't agree with that. Watch your head there. Just goes to show how much in that video I was underappreciating the quarterback's influence in a wide receiver quarterback stack. The other thing I want to point out here on the website, you can come here and you can download these sheets if you would like to use them on your own for more purposes than just looking at them and taking something away from them. And how you can find this, you go up onto my website, www.theFFforge.com. Don't make fun of the layout. I'm not a web guy. I don't know how to make a website. I made one in a rush last year, had a different homepage than this. This is the current homepage. It was much more fun. There were things moving. Was it practical? Did it actually look good? Was it functional? That's up for debate. So I went for a much more simple homepage here, and then up top you can navigate around, or right at the bottom you can see the most recent posts of mine. But at the top, you can't see it. There's little navigations just like, most any website. And there's an analysis, an articles button, a rankings button. Obviously not going to be under the rankings button. And these are this series is under the analysis button, which will bring you to this page, and I put it up front. So there is Monday's videos article that I wrote. Also up here, recent successful video, Zero versus Hero running back. If you were to have clicked the analysis button up top, I do have the ADP hotspots and the hotspots via the draft position, things up here for you to evaluate on your own time. Download if you wish as well. You can download it right there. So back to the topic. On Monday's video, it does focus on best ball. That does not make it useless for other purposes, especially for 2-wide quarterback leagues or super flex leagues. I think that would be probably more relevant as far as the data, the analysis, than this video's information. So keep that in mind. Also, do recommend going and checking that video out. I thought it was a good video, and it's kind of fun if you just want to skip ahead to the actual drafts. About 2/3 of the way through, I tried making what I called the ultimate stack, trying to get the best stack in the most condensed period of time, which I actually figured a way that you could potentially land these 3 stacks, because usually in best ball you get 3 quarterbacks is kind of the recommended strategy to go with. And so in the first 6 rounds, it is possible to get Stephon Diggs, T. Higgins in round 2, Josh Allen to stack with Stephon Diggs, then Joe Burrow in round 4 to stack with T. Higgins, and then in 5 and 6, you could get Christian Kirk and Trevor Lawrence. Let me go back to, I brought up PSA that I wrote in that article where I connected my experience with bringing my kitty cat to the veterinarian and just finding her with blood all around her and stuff, and that whole process. Connecting that with what I dubbed PSA, the P for planning, preparation, practice, however you want to put it, one of those words. The S for support, as in having tools available, and the A for adapt. What this video is, what these tools are up on the website, are the support. They are the tools that you can use to help you to adapt better in a draft. And you can watch me actually adapt, in part thanks to these tools. For instance, in that draft when I was going for that ultimate stack, you know what? Let's get back to that story in a little bit while we go through the information from today. So obviously this video is going to be talking about strategy. The word strategy is going to come up, but it's generally talking about strategies. And generally speaking, I think that the best strategy that you can have for drafting is to take the best player available. But that's a very broad term. Who's best player available? Talking about mine according to my rankings, or are you talking about maybe the fantasy footballers? And if you're talking about the fantasy footballers, are you talking about the consensus ranking that they have? Or are you talking about one of the individuals, Mike's, Jason's, or Andy's individual rankings? Because they vary. Or maybe you're talking about your gut feeling. And what is that gut feeling based off? Is that based off of research that you did personally? Or is that based off of listening to other people's research, who are all going to have different varying opinions and different best player availables depending on who you talk to? What about positional value? Should that be taken into consideration? Technically speaking, in 2022, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, sorry I have an itch, Jalen Hurts, and Joe Burrow were the top 4 scoring players in all of fantasy football. Should they be the first 4 players to go off of the board? Aaron Rodgers had the 13th most fantasy points at the quarterback position last season, the 26th most across all positions, putting him higher than both the 7th best running back and the 7th best wide receivers last year. Should the 13th quarterback be taken in the early 3rd round ahead of guys like Derrick Henry and A.J. Brown, who are this season the 7th ranked running back and wide receiver respectively according to ADP currently? No, they shouldn't. All of this to say, when you're drafting, whether you think that you utilize a strategy or not, you do. If you were to draft simply based on best player available, and your definition of best player available is the guy who is going to get you the most fantasy points, then frankly, you're going to end up with a lot of quarterbacks on your roster. Now, obviously, you're not a robot. And that's why you have strategy that you're going to implement. So what is the definition of best player available? And even if you put the same definition across 10 different experts, you're going to get different answers anyways. Another thing to think about is that as the draft goes along, as you add players onto your team, the best player is going to change. For instance, if you had 4 running backs on your roster and it's pick 5 for whatever reason, at pick 5 now, maybe the best player available technically is a running back. Maybe, I don't know, Christian McCaffrey fell that far, and you want to take him. Whoever the 5th running back is, maybe no other team's taken a running back yet, and the 5th best running back in all fantasy football is still available to you. Is he the best player available? Probably not for your roster. You already have the 4 best running backs. It's going to be really tough for him to ever see the field. You should probably get one of those wide receivers at that point in the draft. Of course, if you have a league where there's a lot of trading, well, that's a different story, but, let's keep things simple. Another factor to remember, and another factor that comes into play that most people factor in as part of their strategy, is you may have someone that's available on the board who you think is the best player available. For instance, that will be the truth of Tyler Lockett at some point in the draft for at least 2 rounds or like a round and a half if I end up drafting him, where he's the best player available in my eyes. But I'm not going to be drafting him if I know that he's not supposed to be drafted for another 3 rounds. If you're aware of the probability of certain players, every player, and where they're going to be making it, whether they can or cannot make it to your next pick or the pick after that, or even 3 picks out, you can better navigate the draft by taking the tools that you find to be the most helpful for your style of drafting and putting them to practice. Maybe even exploring other tools or other strategies and just seeing what those kinds of like the zero and hero running back video, just exploring those strategies and what that kind of roster could look like, then you can better predict and nail down more of your targets that you have in a draft, players that you want on your team, and in this instance, stacks that you would like on your team if you're a stack kind of person, or maybe you're just open to stacks, and here you can say, okay, well, I know that's a very strong stack with, for instance, Amari Cooper. I do have him 2 spots lower than, I have 2 wide receivers available that I have higher than him, but they don't stack. And I would like to have a stack with Deshaun Watson here. I'll take Amari Cooper so that way I can make a really strong stack happen, for instance, if it's going to end up being that strong of a stack, or if you believe that. So back to the website, now to the data and the information. Oh my gosh, my cat's just ruining this recording. I do want to point out one thing. If you were to be thinking about looking at this on your telephone, go into the website and checking this stuff out, my apologies in advance. Portions of this article are just not going to work on your phone. Once again, not an expert at this thing, and something has changed in updates that one of the tools that I used no longer really adapts, I guess, to the mobile platform very well. And regardless, it would have been kind of hard to see, so it works much better on laptop, PC, and I hope on a tablet as well should work better. I'm not 100% sure about the tablet thing though. But that's going to bring us to the My Rankings stack sheet here, which once again, if you saw Monday's video, will look quite similar, but it is different in every way actually. Well, not literally every way, but all the important stuff is totally different. There were a couple of updates to just quick let you know about this sheet comparatively to the others. In the best ball video, I have 33 quarterbacks that were in that data. Here, I'm going to have 23 quarterbacks up to Kyler Murray in my rankings. All of the quarterbacks that I think could, not necessarily all of them will, but could deserve to be drafted for one reason or another in a redraft league. And so it went down from 33 quarterbacks to 23 quarterbacks, and then from 98 receivers down to 79 receivers. However, only 60 of those receivers qualify because they need to have a quarterback in order to stack, and if that quarterback's not getting drafted, or if I don't think they're worthy of being drafted for purposes of this, then you can't make a stack out of it. So it is 23 receivers and 23 quarterbacks and 60 of the wide receivers that match up with those quarterbacks were going to be a part of this data set. We'll get there in a little bit, but that's about 2.5 times more wide receivers than quarterbacks. The other thing that changed is going to be this first column that I will explain. So I'm going to really explain this quickly because I did explain it in the video on Monday. There is a very full explanation in part 1 of the article, and there is an explanation up there in part 2 as well. The first thing here is this easy stack score column. And what this is how easy is it to get a stack, any stack for that player. For Jalen Hurts, for instance, remember we're out of, this score could be as low as 1 or as high as 23, and Jalen Hurts is the toughest quarterback to stack. Patrick Mahomes is the easiest quarterback to stack because he is one of the first quarterbacks off of the board, and the first time that you'd have to worry about a wide receiver being taken would be in the 8th round, and that's going to be the other change. Did I mention it? The fantasy, I changed the ADPs in this data set from the Underdog Fantasy ADPs, and I instead pulled from the Fantasy Pros website ADPs, so that would have altered these easy stack scores, as well as these rounds right here of where each of the wide receivers is going in and what round the quarterbacks are going in, as well as some of these, the colors here. They could come in red, orange, yellow. I know it's a little bit hard to see on here, but I did actually pull that out into a different sheet that we will visit before the end of this video. But what that means is the red coloring for these numbers would mean that Devontae Smith, for instance, gets drafted within fewer than 12 picks of Jalen Hurts, plus or minus. And for A.J. Brown, I believe that is an orange 1 by him. He gets drafted somewhere between 12 and 18 picks of Jalen Hurts. And the last color would be yellow. There's only one player, Jackson Smith and Jigba, who qualified for that, where that player is drafted within 24 picks, according to ADP, of their respective quarterback, so of Geno Smith. There are 17 total players that have coloring. We will get to that shortly. So then we have the quarterback ranks here, the wide receiver ranks. Once again, these ranks, the quarterback and the wide receiver on here, are both my personal rankings. Over here is the quarterback and wide receiver stack score. I mentioned there are 2.5 times wide receivers to quarterbacks. So in order to weight this data set, the quarterback's value in this score is 2.5 times the quarterback ranking. 2.5 times 1 plus 6 gets you 8.5. The wide receiver rankings are just however highly ranked. So the smaller that score, meaning the earlier that higher ranked, I shouldn't say, this isn't based on ADP, so the higher ranked both the quarterback and the wide receiver are, the lower that score would be, the better that quarterback wide receiver stack score will be, the better that pairing is. So that's going to bring us to the first fun list here that we can look at. So let's get that on the screen properly. The top 10 easiest quarterbacks to stack, the top 10 hardest quarterbacks to stack. And the top 10 easiest quarterbacks to stack are going to be Patrick Mahomes at number 1, Brock Purdy's second easiest, Lamar Jackson and Matthew Stafford tied for the third easiest stacks, Russell Wilson, Daniel Jones, Kyler Murray. Then tied for 8th, we have Aaron Rodgers and Tua Tagovailoa, and in 10th place, we have Anthony Richardson. So it just gives you an idea. If you like some of those quarterbacks, maybe you'll like them just a little bit more if you also like stacking. So one way to use this tool here would be to say, I want one of the top quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts. Let's just leave it down to those two. I also really would like to stack my quarterback. I'm also a lot like Steve, and I don't really like to have 2 quarterbacks. I don't care to put 2 quarterbacks on my rosters, even with the really, really deep benches that my home league allows me. I still just don't care to go that route. I'd rather take more stabs at wide receivers and running backs in case I flubbed in some of my picks in the draft or they get injured. Well, if we compare Patrick Mahomes, that's the easiest quarterback to stack, to Jalen Hurts, the toughest quarterback to stack, then I think that makes it pretty easy to say, okay, I'm going to go Patrick Mahomes, unless, of course, you took A.J. Brown in the first round, and then you come around and it's like, okay, now I can take Jalen Hurts. But if you're at Jalen Hurts, you're going to know that it's really tough to get Devontae Smith in most circumstances with your next pick, so maybe I should go with Patrick Mahomes instead if I, for instance, like Kadarius Toney as a target for him later on in the draft, or even if I miss on him, there's going to be other targets that I can then stack with my quarterback. Even if they're not as strong, there's always that chance there, whatever the case. So that brings us to the top 10 hardest quarterbacks to stack, which obviously at number 1 is Jalen Hurts. Number 2, Bryce Young. He gets taken very near all of his wide receiver targets that are worth drafting. Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Jared Goff, Geno Smith, very tough. Kirk Cousins, and Deshaun Watson are going to be the toughest guys to stack along with somebody. As I mentioned, there are 17 quarterbacks, wide receivers, who have colors in this little column here where I have what round they're usually taken in. And that's because of those ADPs being nearest to their quarterback by a certain amount of distance that might make it tricky in order to make those quarterback and wide receiver stacks happen. And in my video on Monday, looking at the stacks when I did the draft, this is where we're going to get to finishing up that story that I said, let's just talk about that later. So the toughest quarterback stacks are, number 1, Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith. Referenced that several times. Justin Fields, DJ Moore get drafted very close to each other. Trevor Lawrence and Christian Kirk. Bryce Young, Jonathan Mingo, tied with Kirk Cousins and Jordan Addison. Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Justin Herbert, Mike Williams. Aaron Rodgers and Alan Lazard. Then we have Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert, each tied in 9th spot here with Brandon Cooks, Keenan Allen, respectively. So we'll come back to that Dak Prescott, Brandon Cooks one. Then tied at 11th, we have Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, Jared Goff and Jamison Williams. 13th, we have Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, so not a super tough one to make happen. Then in 14th place, we have Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley. Keep that in mind. You can read the rest. Kyler Murray, Bryce Young, Geno Smith, along with Rondale Moore, Adam Thielen, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, respectively. So that Trevor Lawrence, Calvin Ridley one is one that ends up happening in my draft on Monday when I went for that ultimate stack. All 3 of those stacks were not easy to make happen. Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs made that happen. Joe Burrow, T. Higgins. T. Higgins got taken ways ahead of his ADP, and it didn't happen. I wasn't able to get him in the second round, so that shifted things. I had a plan B, which was to take Calvin Ridley then instead of taking Christian Kirk. So I went for Calvin Ridley at that point in time. Okay, I don't know where I'm going to cut this in. I'm just going to retell the story. So things go awry in the draft. And it ends up being that I got Calvin Ridley earlier, and then I end up making a decision to hold off on Trevor Lawrence, not reaching for him. Could have reached for him essentially around early. His ADP was literally, I think, a half of a pick after my next pick in the draft. So I'm like, I'm going to push that off. I need a running back. I also need someone to match up with Joe Burrow. And so I'm going to take Joe Mixon. It's not the wide receiver quarterback stack that we've been talking about or anything like that in the video, but don't mind it for some reasons that I actually point out in that video. I think there are some strategic reasons that might have been a good thing for that roster. But the pick right before me, Trevor Lawrence goes. And so at that point, I had to adapt. And because of working with these tools, I was pretty well versed on what the strongest and easiest or whatever stacks were to get. And so I ended up looking for the next strongest stack that I thought would be possible, which would have been Dak Prescott and Brandon Cooks. So I reached for Brandon Cooks, which was probably, now looking at it, a smart idea because there was no guarantee that I would have been able to make the stack happen otherwise. And then I took Dak Prescott there. So it makes sense that my Joe Burrow didn't go through, my Trevor Lawrence stack didn't work out, but I did end up making the Dak Prescott Brandon Cooks stack work, but that did require me to reach for Brandon Cooks. I was under the gun, made a last-second decision. There you go. Those are the toughest, hardest quarterback wide receiver stacks to make happen. So if you are looking to make one of those happen, have a plan B or something like that, or maybe another strategy would be to choose a stack where, like for T. Higgins, you know if you got that that wide receiver or not, and then at that point you could switch to whatever your next best stack is that you want to attack. So you kind of find out how things are going to work early on in the draft. So just because it's easy to find a quarterback stack with your wide receiver of choice, that doesn't mean that it's a good stack necessarily. And just because it's tough Well, that probably means that it is a good stack, but that, as you can see here, a little bit heavily weighted. These are the same colors as I pulled from that, same column that we've been talking about as far as how tough it is to get these guys, the 17 guys that we just went over, toughest stacks. Obviously, it is more heavily weighted towards the top end here, but that doesn't always necessarily mean that it is a strong stack, as we can see down here. So here's my list of, based on my stack scores, based on my current rankings, the best quarterback and wide receiver stacks the way down to the worst. Now, I will say, I'm not taking the worst quarterback wide receiver stacks and really doing anything with that strategy wise. To me, I don't care. Like I guess you're not targeting those stacks, but I feel like you already know that. Sorry, I have a flying thing here. Kyler Murray, Michael Wilson, obviously you're not trying to make that stack happen. If it happens, it is the worst stack according to this data currently out there, according to the guys who I think are draftable. And Michael Wilson's very much on that very end of that, but I do see some upside potential with him. Then Matthew Stafford, Van Jefferson, second on this list. Now that's one where I would say, that's very much due to the fact that Matt Stafford's kind of suffering right now in the rankings back at 20th. He could way outproduce that. Same with Van Jefferson, could way outproduce where he's going. So that's a stack that I see a lot of upside with. Actually, one I wouldn't be opposed to targeting, but it is a high-risk stack, I suppose, compared to what the current thoughts are on those guys as far as drafting them. And so that's one where maybe you want to target it, but then you should probably pair that up with another, not necessarily stack, but another quarterback that's a mid to late round quarterback, so you can maybe fluff those around a little bit week to week on who you play. However you want to work that out, I guess. But then third up, we have Jordan Love, Jaden Reed. Also not an easy stack to get. Bryce Young, with either of his targets, tough to get. I mean, it's a bad stack, and it's tough to get. As we saw, that he has the two hardest quarterback, the second hardest to stack with any of his targets. And then Russell Wilson, Tim Patrick, I would view that much more like the Matt Stafford, Van Jefferson. Like, those are two targets where if you want to go for some quarterback wide receiver stacks, but you don't care to get like top end quarterbacks, you're fine taking two middle of the line quarterbacks and playing the best guy each week. And then you could have a guy that's kind of going to potentially be on your bench, but maybe fill in at your whatever. You could stack them up in good matchups where you're expecting a lot from them. Potentially, you could go right ahead and use that stack. You'd have two of those stacks. Wouldn't be that terrible. Then Anthony Richardson, Josh Downs is a bad stack. Russell Wilson, Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers with Marvin Mims, Romeo Doubs, Mecole Hardman. I think those all make sense. Once again, I'm not taking a whole lot away from that because they're the worst stacks because of, look at them. I think it's fairly obvious that these aren't going to be the best darn stacks to get. So depending on how you utilize this tool, I really wouldn't care about this bottom half or so of the list. It's more of these guys that I'm kind of checking out and seeing what the data says, especially if you look at for like best ball with the ADP. But based on my rankings, the 10 best quarterback wide receiver stacks are Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, Jalen Hurts and Devonta Smith, Joe Burrow and T. Higgins, Tua Tagovailoa and Tyreek Hill. So that's one that kind of surprised me, even based on my rankings, where I have both of them pretty well ranked on the higher end, I suppose we could say. And still, even with that, down there, ranked 6th best, I would have thought that would be like, I don't know, 3rd or 4th best. And then Deshaun Watson, Amari Cooper in 7th, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb in 8th, and Justin Herbert and Tua Tagovailoa tied here with Keenan Allen and Jalen Waddle for the 10th, 9th best quarterback wide receiver stacks. Overall, like the list, but Deshaun Watson, Amari Cooper, I might have made a face when I said that. So there are a couple people on this list where if I were to have made this out of my imagination, I would not have imagined them in these spots. But based on my rankings, I do think that they make a lot of sense. And the question is how comfortable am I with this, being out there as a tool to use? So the Amari Cooper, Deshaun Watson stack making it up here at 7th. Initially, I'm like, oh God, am I way overweighing the quarterbacks in this? Is that what's done that? Because, well, I also have Amari Cooper pretty highly ranked. I have him as my 12th ranked wide receiver right now. So it's another sign of like, I'm looking at this, I'm surprised. I always am when I look at my rankings, and Amari Cooper's there. When I did my wide receiver rankings video, I was a little bit, I mentioned that I don't think he'll end up there, but I haven't been able to lower him yet for multiple reasons. When I look at Amari Cooper, I look at the reasons that I have him ranked 12th amongst wide receivers. I look at the guys immediately behind him, and I just can't quite move him back yet. Part of that reason is if, I have Deshaun Watson fairly well ranked, and that's because of the potential. If he reaches the potential that I think he will, last year was not a surprise to me that he was bad, and I'm expecting him to be much better, and I expect in no time that he'll be back to the old Deshaun Watson as a quarterback. Maybe he won't be, and so it is a riskier pick, but still I have him fairly well ranked, and if I am expecting that there to be a good chance of that happening, that means that there's a good chance that Amari Cooper could definitely be a top 12 wide receiver like I have him currently ranked. So that's why I can't move him back easily. That's how he gets up here as the 7th best pairing. And so if I look at this and I try to move him down, just based on thinking about especially Deshaun Watson, he's a guy who's heavily targeted his number one targets, DeAndre Hopkins, and then what's his glass hamstring, who was, by the way, one of my better draft picks ever as far as how much value you got for that pick the year that he went off until he got suspended. I can't think of his name right now, but also heavily targeted one guy in that offense. It wouldn't be surprising, shocking if Amari Cooper gets heavily targeted and if that offense is quite good this season. And so would I move him behind CeeDee Lamb if I was just making this list on my own? Probably, but I think that's about as far, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, that's about as far back as I would push him, and that's because I do have a lot of faith in Dak Prescott as well. And so, and think if anything, he's too low on my rankings. Dak Prescott suffers a little bit from the same issue ranking-wise as we're going to come into the next surprise of these top stacks, Justin Jefferson and Kirk Cousins here at the 15th best stack, below, the number one wide receiver, below all those other guys, but also my 20th, so my 18th ranked quarterback. And this is the thing. If I were to manually move Justin Jefferson up, I would probably move him up to behind Tyreek Hill, him and Kirk Cousins, compared to Tua and Tyreek Hill. Here's where I'm going to straight up disagree with Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins being the 15th best wide receiver quarterback stack, is I do have Kirk Cousins ranked lower than where I expect him to finish the season. If I had to put money on one spot, I would say I think Kirk Cousins would be the 14th best quarterback in the 2023 season via average fantasy points scored per week. The issue with that is, or maybe even not even average fantasy points, but just overall fantasy points scored, will give him a little bit of make it a little bit easier for that to happen for him, because he is one of those guys who tends to stay healthy and play all season long. So the reason that I have him ranked 18th and not higher, even though I expect him to be higher, is when you do rankings, you don't only factor in the opportunity of like, this is the order I think that these guys are going to finish the season, and you have to account for upside, you have to account for in some instances injuries or suspensions, you have to account for other factors than just purely I think that they're going to finish at this, this highly on the season. For me, Kirk Cousins is a guy who almost surely will be 15th to 13th, has no shot at being a number one quarterback, a top 12 quarterback. Whereas there are other guys who I think have a shot at it, although their floor is not as easy to predict, as consistent, as solid, as comforting as Kirk Cousins' floor is. And so when it comes to draft time, yeah, I'm going to take a shot at a guy who could be a top 8, top 7 quarterback, whereas I don't think that that's possible for Kirk Cousins. Whatever the case, I actually went through and if I had Kirk Cousins ranked 14th, where I think he'll kind of finish, he does jump up Justin Jefferson and him as a stack to jump up to right behind Amari Cooper, ahead of CeeDee Lamb. So essentially 7th or 8th best stack there. And so that's that. Just a reminder, you can download these right here. You could download this once I get this published. I do not have this article published, but it will be published by the time that you're seeing this video. You could download this sheet right above it. We can go over here via this link. And I hope that you find some use from these tools. This is really just video more so for the tools and to hopefully make you think about things in a different way, and just so that way you can see some of these good stacks, bad stacks, in my opinion, mathematically. Not that some of these won't change a little bit throughout the off season, but all in all, and especially like with this is based on ADP, so this isn't opinion at all. All in all, this is information that I think is good to have when you go into a draft. Are you going to take Tyreek Hill or Stephon Diggs? Not everybody has Tyreek Hill ranked higher than Stephon Diggs. And you're like, I really want to make a stack happen with my number 1 quarterback. You're going to have a much easier shot at doing that with Tyreek Hill, a better chance of making that happen. Your number 1 wide receiver with your number 1 quarterback, Tua. And if you're comfortable with those two, maybe you do that instead of going for Stephon Diggs and trying to match him up with Josh Allen, who might be a little bit harder to pair up with him. Just something to think about. I think that's where this finds its most use, is maybe a little bit of that in practice, just pre-planning things out, having a couple of options if you like to stack. I hope I covered everything I wanted to in this video. I appreciate everything. Like, comment, subscribe. Peace out.